All right, welcome to Touchdown Talks. I'm Spencer Taylor. This is going to be a quick episode specifically focused on the Minnesota Vikings. As I mentioned in my previous video, I had decided this last few days, week or two coming now, I recognized looking at my preseason predictions and such that I massively underestimated the Vikings. I know a lot of people did. I wasn't alone in this, but I personally wanted to own up to the fact that I definitely underestimated the Vikings coming into this season for the sake of analysis, of course, and then for the sake of my own predictions and such as that going forward. Even I wanted to revisit my predictions throughout the whole season, specifically for the Vikings, and make some corrections on where I think now going forward where I think the Vikings are headed as far as results for the season. Before I go over what I think the new results are going to be for their schedule and games they're going to win and lose, I want to just go over some stats that back up just how great the Vikings have been so far this season. Obviously, we know if you look at individual stats, if you look at Sam Darnold, for example, he has massively outperformed expectations. Right now, he would really be in that top five, top three in the conversation for MVP at this point in the season if we were to vote only 3 weeks in. But through 3 weeks, as a team, though, for their stats, average margin of victory, the Vikings are at third right now. They're winning on average by a margin of victory of 18.3. So they are not just winning close games. They are dominating the competition. Now, to be fair, in week 2, it was a pretty close matchup between them and the 49ers, at least score-wise. But honestly, even in that game where the score was pretty close by the end, some of those points for the 49ers came in garbage time. So really, the Vikings have been pretty dominant. The week 1 game was against the Giants, so not necessarily the greatest team, but they dominated the Giants in week 1. As I said with the 49ers, they didn't necessarily dominate them at least as far as the scoreboard is concerned by the end, but really throughout the game they mostly controlled it at home in Minnesota, and really at almost no point did it feel like the 49ers were really in that game. And then week 3, they also dominated against the Texans, who are believed to be a really good team, one of the best teams in the league this year. Certainly coming into it, that was the expectations for the Texans. So for the Vikings to have a margin of victory of 18.3 on average so far, that is pretty crazy. I mean, I know in past seasons, they had a couple seasons where they were one of those teams that almost every game was coming down to like a field goal, and they just happened to be getting lucky and winning quite a few of those. That was specifically a couple seasons ago in 2022. They sort of had that outcome, ended up getting to the playoffs, playing against the Giants there. But this year, they are, at least through 3 weeks, dominating the competition, even against good teams like the 49ers and the Texans. Points per game, they're 6th. Yards per game, 12th. Yards per play, 6th. Touchdowns, total touchdowns for the year so far as an offense, they're 3rd in the league. And then on defense, they are allowing the 6th least amount of points per game. They rank 14th in points in yards per game allowed, and then yards per play allowed, they're 6th, and then touchdowns allowed to the opponent, they are 2nd. So they're scoring a lot. They're not allowing opponents to score very much. Just really offense and defense, they are upper half of the league, and in quite a few key stats, they are top 5, top 10 in those stats, both for offense and defense. So they are doing really well. Coach Kevin O'Connell deserves a lot of credit for getting the Vikings to where they're at, in my opinion. Certainly for how Sam Darnold is playing. He's playing the best football of his career so far, at least for the first 3 games of the season. And the Vikings truly look like a dominant force to be reckoned with in the NFC, and certainly in the NFC North, which, as I've mentioned in the video yesterday and previously, this NFC North division is looking very stacked. Unfortunately for me, as a Bears fan, they are looking like the odd one out in that case. But seriously, a tough division, certainly offensively, but pretty well-rounded, at least when it comes to the Vikings. They're pretty well-rounded, above average in basically every stat on both sides of the ball, at least the stats that are key and matter and, that will get talked about a lot. Now, with those stats in mind, let's go into my predictions going forward for them for the rest of the season. As I mentioned, part of the reason that this was inspired is my preseason predictions for the Vikings were looking very poor. For my predictions when the schedule released, I had predicted the Vikings to beat the Giants and then lose against the 49ers and the Texans. But then my predictions that I made just before week 1, I had actually predicted the Vikings to go 0-3 to start the season. So not very good predictions for me for those first 3 weeks as it comes to the Vikings. And so that's why I felt a need to correct that record and get my predictions right for the Vikings. So for the rest of their season, starting at week 4, you will see I do have, so in red are the games that I believe that they will lose. Green are the games that I believe they will win going forward. And sure, the final record I have for them here, not really the greatest record, but it is enough that it should get them into the playoffs. And honestly, I could see them outdoing even this prediction. Again, I want to correct the prediction and how much I underestimated the Vikings in the offseason, but at the same time, I do want to take into account the possibility of injuries or things like that cropping up. Also, they do have some tough matchups here. They also have a stint there where they have 3 road games in a row. So, there's a lot of variables and things that make me believe there are still games that we very well may end up seeing them lose later on in the season that right now we would assume they'll win. So, again, I don't want to overcorrect, but I did make a pretty huge correction from what my previous predictions had been on them. I mean, before the season started, both rounds of my predictions, I had the Vikings finishing with only about 3 to 4 wins, which is obviously looking pretty ludicrous at this point. So for me to now be projecting them to win 10 games, that's quite a big step up. So starting up with this upcoming week at the Packers, I think they do lose that one. I know the Packers may be playing without Jordan Love, but I still think Matt LaFleur, crazy coaching staff. Of course, both sides, this will be a pretty good matchup, but it's on the road in Lambeau, and even though they're on a backup quarterback, Malik Willis did play pretty well last week. I think the Packers are able to do it again, and being at home, I think they're able to just barely sneak out the win against the Vikings. I think this should be a pretty crazy NFC North matchup this upcoming week. Then going on the back to home in week 5 against the Jets, I think the Vikings get the win at home there, and then they will have their bye week. Then coming right out of that, they'll host the Lions. I think they lose that one. That one could be a pretty interesting one as well. And then right after that, I think they'll go to LA. I think this one could be a scrappy matchup, and I think this one for me could go either way, certainly depending on the Rams' health, depending on if they've been able to get players like Cooper Kupp back, Puka Nacua back. Do they have any new key injuries by that point? So this one's one of those that definitely, depending on the health of both teams, could go either way in my opinion right now. But I have the Vikings losing that one. And then they go back home, play against the Colts. They win that one. And then they start their 3-game stretch on the road. Go to the Jaguars, I think, by week 10. The Jaguars have fixed some of their current problems they've been going through. Jags get the win there in Duval County. Then they go on the road to Tennessee the next week, get a win there. I don't think the Titans are a very good team. I think they're one of the worst teams in the league this year. Certainly as long as they're starting Will Levis, and I don't know that they have anything all that much better behind him. So Vikings get the win there in week 11. Then the Vikings go to Chicago to play against the Chicago Bears. And obviously I would love to pick my Chicago Bears to win against the Vikings. And as you'll see later, I actually am giving them a win one of the 2 games out of the 2 that they will play in that rivalry matchup. But I'm not going to give it to the Bears in Chicago in week 12 because for the Bears, they play the Packers the week before. So I think that one may be a game that, because it's a bigger rivalry, a lot more stakes in that one. Of course, they're both division rivalry matchups. The Bears really have a lot of division rivalry games pretty much back-to-back that last half of the season. But nonetheless, for the Bears, they'll be coming right off of playing the Packers the previous week, and then they'll be hosting the Vikings right after that. So I think the Vikings go into Chicago, get the win there, and then they go back home, face the Cardinals the following week, week 13. This one will be right around Thanksgiving. This should be the Sunday after Thanksgiving, I believe. They will drop that game to the Cardinals. Kyler Murray, the connection he's got going with Marvin Harrison Jr., I think they've got some good stuff going there. So this could be somewhat of an upset on the road for the Cardinals. So I'm giving them that upset win still against the Vikings here. Again, trying to avoid overcorrecting here for the Vikings. So that's why I'm giving that loss to that win to the Cardinals still. And then hosting the Falcons, I think the Vikings get that win. Kirk Cousins revenge game. I don't think it works out for Kirk Cousins and the Vikings, or for Kirk Cousins and the Falcons. The Vikings defend their home turf, and Kirk Cousins gets sent packing. Then the Vikings host the Bears. This one they do win in Minnesota. Then they go on the road to the Seahawks, win that game, come back home for their final home game against the Packers. I think they win this one against the Packers. And then for the final game of the season, they go on the road to the Lions. This could be a matchup for the division, even if not a matchup that could very much determine seeding for both teams. And I think the Vikings drop that final game of the season against the Lions. So with all that, that obviously results with, because the Vikings have already won 3 games, and I've got them winning 7 here and losing 7. That puts them at 10-7 overall for the season. And I do want to say I could see them very much ending up doing better. As I said, I see the Rams as a go either way game. The Jags are struggling right now. Obviously, my Bears are struggling right now. The Cardinals, they've been playing pretty good and pretty scrappy, but who knows? The newest Call of Duty will be out, so we'll see how Kyler Murray's commitment levels are at that point. I'm mostly joking there, but still, if we're to say those games flip, for example, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 games right there. So if those 4 games flip, we're looking at a 14-3 team in the Vikings, which is possible, but I think that's at the very, very ceiling, and that's assuming that the Vikings stay basically perfectly healthy, which obviously isn't going to happen. So again, that's why I'm leaning more towards keeping them about 10-7. I'll revisit this at about the mid-season point when I revisit all my projections, but for now, I'm projecting the Vikings to go 10-7 for the rest of the season. And that's going to do it for my amendment to my Vikings predictions for the 2024 season. Now, really quick before I finish off the video, just got a preview for you, the game that we have coming up tonight. Thursday Night Football for Week 4, kicking it off in New York. We've got the Dallas Cowboys going to visit the Giants. I think this is a game that the Cowboys at least look like they're correcting the ship in a sense. The Cowboys and Dak Prescott have farmed a lot of wins off the Giants in Prescott's career. I think they do so again in New Jersey. I think they'll get the win. Dallas currently, the betting lines when they opened were at Dallas -5. Those have currently moved up to Dallas -6. That's a little bit high for me. I think I would pick the Dallas money line. And at -5, I like betting on the Cowboys. At -6 or anything higher, I don't know that I really like that number. But yeah, otherwise, I think I like that. Personally, right now for me, the total point bet being at 45.5, I actually think I like the over for that. I think this will be a matchup that gets up there in the scoring, maybe not a super high scoring game, but over 45.5, I could see that. The Cowboys don't have much of a run game. They don't have much of a run defense. I think the Giants could exploit that a little bit, although I think at the same time for the Giants, this might be a game where they wish that they had Saquon Barkley back, that if they had him still on the team, they could quite likely beat the Cowboys this week if they had kept him. But yeah, so I take the Cowboys to win by maybe a touchdown, slightly less, and then I take the total score to be, slightly over 45.5. So, around 46, 50 as the total score is about where I would go for this Thursday night game tonight. So I hope you will enjoy that. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.